In this video, I'll show you how I made this diorama using balsa wood, XPS foam, and some miniatures I had lying around. I'll also tell you a bit about the story I was trying to tell. Welcome back, everyone. I hope you all are well. For this project, I had these two D&D miniatures in my giant pile of unpainted minis, and they popped out as two potential foes for a diorama that I could try some new techniques on. I got both of these miniatures on sale at my local hobby shops. I think I picked up the giant ape to be a King Kong miniature at one point, and then I think the Drider just kind of screamed a good painting practice for me. So I figured two birds with one stone for this project. The ape came as one large miniature, and putting together the Drider was pretty straightforward. However, when I got to the legs, one side I put on from back to front, and then the other side I did front to back, and then that was definitely a mistake. I'd recommend anyone making this later to go back to front. Overall, I really enjoy these miniatures for their cost and detail. They do come with some plastic lines, which I'll use some plastic putty to resolve, just by dabbing them on top and then wiping away the excess as needed. And then in the areas where I can't wipe away the excess, I'll use a watered down paintbrush to kind of feather it out a bit to make it look as realistic as possible. Next, we can push the miniatures aside to work on the base of the diorama. This is actually the largest one I've ever made. To start, I took the canvas off of some frames and then glued it onto the back of the XPS foam. Once the glue dried, I could then cut the foam down to the length of the frames just to have some nice clean edges for the diorama. This specific piece of foam had a couple dents in it, so I cut away at it with my hobby knife to create some uneven terrain, specifically trying to make it look like there was a bit of a valley or a natural divot in the ground. I did also want to add some more elevation into this diorama, so I added another couple pieces of XPS foam and also went kind of ham at them with my hobby knife. I did mark out where the gorilla would eventually end up standing, so I made sure not to cut into his base. Once the rough shapes were cut out, I could then come in with a butane torch to irregular the rest of the terrain. Since the ape's base was so big and I thought it would be hard to remove him from it, I then glued him to the rest of the base at this point. Based off the information I researched about Driders, I thought it would be a cool idea for the Drider to be hunting the ape in this diorama, so I took my handheld rotary tool and drilled into the ape so I could make little music wire arrows sticking out all over his body. Once all the foundational parts of the diorama have been set up, I can now move to creating the actual terrain. For this, I'll use a base of plaster Paris. I really like using this stuff because I can just scoop some in, add some water to the consistency I want, and then spread it around with my gloved hand. Sometimes it comes off a little bit more rocky than I would anticipate, but I had a future step to help address that. I was also hyper careful around the ape's legs, and even though I did get some on his legs, I came in after it dried and just knocked it off with a sculpting tool. Then for detailing the terrain, I came in with Vallejo's thick European mud and spread it all over the base, being pretty generous with my application. In the spirit of spring cleaning and going through my drawers to use up some of my lesser used materials, I took a bunch of tufts of static grass and threw them all over the diorama, the longer ones being where the grass will eventually be, and then the shorter ones to be where the forest base will be. Moving to the forest base, I made a watered down white glue mixture, and I found out that hickory smoking chip that you can find in the barbecue section create pretty convincing fallen tree debris. So I filtered out the largest pieces and put a light dusting of these smoker chips all across the area that I wanted to be future forest floor. And to really sell the scale of it, I did go in with some tweezers and pull out the largest chips. Then I knocked off the excess and pretty much repeated the same process with some static grass, using my static grass applicator to make sure it stands up as clear as possible. Once everything had dried, I can take it outside for a flat black prime. I knew I wanted to start off with painting up my large ape, since this would be the part of the painting process that would be easiest to fix my mistakes with. Now, I've never painted a large ape before, but shockingly, when you Google silverback gorilla, which are in fact a subspecies of ape, and this looks more like a silverback gorilla to me than a bonobo, silverbacks are mostly shades of blue flesh and then light fur on their back, but other than that, they're very dark creatures. So this felt like a really easy starting point for this project. Where the fur got too light for my liking, I then just came back in with either black contrast paint or black washes to bring back the recesses. While the airbrush was out, I then wanted to attack the majority of the base of the diorama. I started off with a nice earth tone from Vallejo, and then I went over the grasses with ever so increasing shades of green, so that I really wanted this diorama to look like we're coming out of a forest clearing into a semi-wide open meadow that is verdant with life. To make sure none of the details went unnoticed, I then came in and covered all of the earth area with an Agrax earth shade layer. I did thin this down a bit just to help my supplies make it to the end of the project. Once the mass details were done on the base, I could then come into our silverback gorilla and bring out his details, specifically his mouth, teeth, and the weapon sticking out of him. I just built up a few layers of red in the mouth, came in with some pure white along the teeth, trying to make sure that I didn't get it too far onto the existing red areas, and then the arrows got a nice dark brown color. I did forget that wounds typically had blood, so I did come in and put little dabs around the arrows. As this gorilla was attached to a 16-inch rectangular base, I really struggled getting footage for his eyes, so I'm kind of running through it here. Pretty much it was dots of white, followed by dots of yellow, followed by even smaller dots of black. I really think it came through. I was very happy with this end product, but he did look like he had veneers, so I definitely had to bring his teeth back to reality. Usually while I paint miniatures, when I'm recording, I'll tell you about my painting process that's going into it. However, for this video, I actually want to tell you about the story that I'm trying to tell in this diorama. When I first got this Drider, I really didn't picture him as a villain. So when I started doing research onto what Driders actually were, I knew I needed to do something a little bit different. Driders are typically bloodthirsty drow that have gone through a really painful transformation process. And drow need to drink blood in order to survive. So I like the idea that this Drider, formerly a drow named Nim, he is on a hunt for sustenance, pretty much. He is choosing not to hunt the desired drow or common folk of his area, but instead he's going out of his way to hunt down a monster on the outskirts of town that has been plaguing the lands. And although this large ape will not be as delicious or succulent or nutrient rich for him, He knows that pursuing this beast will not only sustain him, but also win him favors with the rest of the town. But he also knows that the town will never champion him as a hero. He just hopes to become a pest that they're apathetic about. And as Nim has been hunting this monster, it's actually proven to be a lot more difficult than he had anticipated. He managed to get the drop on him about 1.5 miles ago, as evidenced in the arrow to the ape's back. But the ape chose to run, and Nim had to follow. This hunt has been taking a very long time and is proving to be more and more dangerous. As Nim puts arrow after arrow into the beast only seems to get more and more aggressive, and more willing to stop running and choose to fight Nim. A fight that Nim most certainly will lose. And in the moment that this diorama is choosing to encapture, Nim has been tracking the ape through this forest, and he just rounded the corner and saw a clearing. And across the clearing, he saw the ape. The ape is choosing now as his opportunity to attack Nim and survive himself. So in this tiny field, these two monstrosities to the world are choosing to have their final duel, where one will survive and one will die. Neither of them truly want to be doing this, but they each need to do this in the next few moments. After all, it is just hunted versus the hunter. I needed to dress this diorama a bit, and one of my hyperfixations is the concept of making model trees. So for this diorama, I wanted to try something new with balsa wood and gardening wire. To start, I made a couple wooden shivs using my hobby knife to shave it down, and then some clay sculpting tools to texture it. And then I cut very many 1-inch length gardening wire segments. It ended up being about 70 per tree, so about 400 in total. And then I used a pair of pliers to dip each one in glue and stick it on the outside of a tree to help make something that convinced me as a spruce tree. I did bring the music wire back out and put little pieces into the bottom of the trees to create anchor points for later. I then wanted to trim these trees down, making the top branches smaller than the bases and giving them a nice conical shape. Then, before it got too messy, I put down some parchment paper and sprayed the trees with some watered down white glue so I could spread some coffee grounds all along the base of the trunks to give them some cool looking texture. Once everybody had been textured up, I put them in a tray and got ready with some spray adhesive so I could apply some flocking to all of the branches. Welcome to my garage. This is where I spray my aerosols, but I went through each tree and from a downward angle sprayed the adhesive and then sprinkled flocking on several rounds of times till I got a nice coverage. Then I rushed the trees back inside to give them a black prime. I could have probably done this with a black spray can, but I didn't think that far in advance. Plus then I came in with a light wood color for the entirety of the trunks. Then off screen, I repeated the process of adding the flocking to the branches. I also decided I wanted more detail on the forest floor, so I dry brushed everything before drilling little holes in for the anchor points for the trees. But once everything was in a good place, I just started putting all the trees in, evenly spacing them as much as possible. Once I was happy with the build, I could free our drider and put him onto the base. I also thought the arrows needed to stand out a little bit more, so I added little white pieces of plastic to the end of them just to give it that final oomph. Finally, we can paint the sides black and move on to some glamour shots. I'd like to take this final moment to say thank you to each of you who came in and checked out my project. I really appreciate it. This hobby is my creative outlet to escape the rest of the world, and it's a little whimsical, but I really enjoy it. If you want to stay up to date with all my projects, do all the YouTube things, like, comment, subscribe. But other than that, I hope you all have an excellent week, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye.